Blog Talk Radio.
Good afternoon, NBA fans. We are back with another edition of NBA Unplugged. I'm your host, Jacob Noble from the ProBasketballTalk.com. Alongside of me, as always, is Brian Geltzella from HoopsCritic.com. How are we doing today, Brian?
Doing good, Jacob. How you doing today, pal?
Good. I'm a little confused. I got to admit, I didn't stay up late for the late game last night. Went to bed at half, but I don't think many of us had Memphis being down 3-1 in a series, and that's something that's pretty shocking to most people who picked the Grizzlies to be the upsetters in this playoffs.
I'm shocked. One thing I didn't expect with all this, and I'm going to be very, very frank about it, okay? The Grizzlies are playing like morons. This is as dumb offensive basketball as I've seen from a talented team with all the ingredients to be a contender. Truth of the matter is, Jacob, last year, they beat the Spurs as an 8 seed in the first round, as an 8 beating a 1, and then they gave the Thunder everything they could handle in the second round. And they did that primarily because their big offensive threat was Zach Randolph down on the block. This is not a great perimeter shooting team. It's a very athletic team. It's a team that prides themselves on causing turnovers and not turning the ball over much themselves. They haven't done a wonderful job in either of those ends. Tony Allen being hurt hasn't helped them. But offensively, they didn't have Rudy Gay last year. And, you and I laughed last week where somebody made the implication that they were better without Rudy Gay. Well, last night they would have been better without Rudy Gay. The shot selection's awful. He is not a willing passer. When he is willing to pass, he's not a capable passer. And for Rudy Gay to get 25 shots in a game where Randolph only takes 11 is a huge problem for the Grizzlies. Between Randolph and Marc Gasol last night, they had 4 touches in the low block for an entire game that went into overtime. That's not going to be enough. And Memphis is, they're in a big hole here. They better smarten up fast, and even if they do smarten up fast, the Clippers got a lot of momentum on their side and the best player on the floor on both teams in Chris Paul. Grizzlies have an uphill climb here. I never pictured them to play this stupid and fall into this kind of hole.
Yeah, and you point out that the Grizzlies are failing to get inside. Before we go any further, we should announce that our guest today is Sam Amick from none other than SI.com, a good friend of the show. I believe this is his 3rd time on with us. I think that's more than anybody. Matt Moore might have been on 3 or 4 times, but Sam's been on the show quite some time and often, and we love having him. And he gives us that West Coast perspective, and he's been busy as hell, but we're going to thank him so much when he comes on today and gives us some time to discuss these playoffs, as we've had a line of great guests. I don't think we can get any better after this week. I mean, we're going to have to stop pulling teeth to get some better guests on. I don't know if it's possible, but I just want to get out there that we have Sam Amick joining us around 5:10, if that's correct.
5:10, we're going to be patching Sam, and I love when we have Sam on because Sam is one of the 3 best info guys in the country. I'd probably put it to him, Adrian Wojnarowski, and Mark Stein as being the best 3 guys with breaking stories. When we get Sam on here, it's a lot less about breaking stories and a lot more about talking to a guy who knows basketball as good as anybody and getting Sam's analytical side about what he thinks and who he's talked to. And Sam talks to a lot of people. So Sam's perspective on what's going on in the league, which kind of gets overshadowed in his work for Sports Illustrated because he's such a terrific information guy and has a lot of incredible sources. You get that from him with SI. He comes on our show with us and gives us a lot of time always. He's a very good friend of the show and has been from the very beginning. One thing I have to say here, Jacob, is before you and I were getting any big guests, Sam was always willing to come on and give us time, and that is something that no matter what happens here, I'll never forget because he's one of the true good people that you're going to meet in the NBA. But it's fun to get him on and get his analytical side and bounce some things around with him. He's a blast.
That's kind of what we made our show tailored to be. Is we like to get these guys on here and get them out of their groove, get them out of their 9-to-5 position, and put them in a different chair, put a different hat on them, and see how they think and see what they're feeling. And I think they enjoy that as well because they don't get the opportunity to do it at their jobs. And, they have agendas they have to follow, and they got things they need to do. But with us, they get to have fun and, put their opinions out there, and it's always a good time when we have Sam on. But let's get back to the Grizzlies real quick because you pointed out that they're just not attacking the basket. And we'll talk to Sam about this series because I think this one's probably the most intriguing outside of the Celtics and Hawks, which has been decimated by injuries on both sides, and that's another head-scratching series. But sticking on here, the Clippers haven't been playing great defense inside. So why won't they exploit that? Why won't they just get the ball inside? And you pointed out that Rudy Gay should not take twice as many, almost 3 times as many shots as their, best low-post scorer. That's just not fundamental basketball. You're always taught to get the highest percentage shot, work the ball in, and they can kick it out. We've seen how well the Lakers are doing it against the Nuggets, who play, a faster pace kind of tempo, and that's kind of what the Clippers like to do. They like to get out and, they didn't get the nickname Lob City for no reason. So having said that, Memphis just needs to get the ball inside. Let Zach Randolph, their workhorse, set up the rest of the offense for them. You can take those outside shots after you create the spacing.
Yeah, and, they're not a great outside shooting team. That's why so much of this is so puzzling. Because I just, it's funny, before the season someone had made mention to me of the fact that there may be some significant issues personally between Rudy Gay and Zach Randolph. And I'd heard that somewhere, but, I'm always a big proponent of guys don't have to like each other to win together. I don't think
anybody likes Michael Jordan.
Correct. And I don't think Randolph's Gay's intentionally ignoring Randolph. But nonetheless, Gay, it's been hero ball. Gay's wanted to be the man here. And it's that thing that Michael Jordan brought to the NBA where everybody thinks they have to be him. A good wing player is going to, take as many shots as he wants to take. And the thing for Gay is, their fortunes don't have to be tied to if he's shooting the ball well or not. That's not the kind of team that they are. And that's what's so distressing about what's happened here, is that, they got away from their identity and what helped them make a run last year's playoffs. And the thing is, even if they get back to it now, heck, it may be a little too late, Jacob.
Yeah, most teams usually don't come down from 3-1s. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I'm pretty sure it's not a good number of teams that are able to accomplish that. Having said that, you make up great points, and I think, just trying to put my Lionel Hollins cap on for a quick second here. If you were going into this series, you're looking up the matchups, individual matchups more so, and you're looking at across the board, you're not going to beat a Mike Conley, Chris Paul. Even in the paint, yes, I give the edge to Memphis because I like their bigs better, but it's still pretty tight there. Blake Griffin's an excellent player, despite his inefficiencies on, defense and free throw shooting. We can get into that later. DeAndre Jordan's supposed to be a defensive player, not really playing the great defense this postseason. So you could see why Lionel Hollins would think that Rudy Gay's matchup with Caron Butler or whatever other wing player that they lack on that team.
They've been guarding Randy Foy.
So you can see why they would want to exploit that matchup, but there comes a time where you're sacrificing too much just to get to that matchup.
I think so. I mean, Foy has been terrific on Gay. He really has been. He's been, here's the thing about putting a guy like Foy on Gay. Gay's not going to go down on the low block. He's just not doing it. Should he do it? Absolutely. He would be a guy that if he could post up a little bit could certainly, give them a little bit of trouble, especially if they're going to try to go with a guy like Foy on him. They haven't done much of that at all. There's been a gross lack of imagination on the Grizzlies' part offensively, and I think what bothers me the most about it is none of it has to be all that imaginative. Just pass the ball inside to your big guys. Just get them the rock. I mean, and that's what it should be. Hasn't been that. They're down 3-1 in the series, and I think we'd be remiss in talking about this series if we didn't mention not only how terrific Chris Paul's been, but the way in a very short time you've seen Blake Griffin grow up as a player. Last night he was outstanding, but not only outstanding from a scoring standpoint in the post, his passing out of double teams was absolutely terrific. Setting other guys up, he's very willing to do that. He takes the ball to the basket like an animal, we know that, but his attitude in the playoffs has been very, very different. And it's been a great thing for the Clippers. It's probably been the biggest difference in the Clippers between the way they were in the regular season and the way they are in the playoffs has been the almost the instant maturity of Blake Griffin.
Yeah, I mean, he had 7 assists, the same amount as Chris Paul. He had plus 18 last night, and he was a difference maker if you look back at it. Yeah, Chris Paul kind of willed him back in Game 1, and you and I are going to talk about that game in a quick second before we grab Sam on. But you're absolutely right, and Blake Griffin has a high ceiling, and a lot of people were debating the season, is this kind of where he is? Is this where his plateau is going to be reached? And I say no, because you can always learn how to play defense, and that's usually the deficit or inefficiencies of most NBA players is they can't play defense, unless you're Tony Allen and you can't play offense. But most players come in, being top scorers in their high school, averaging 30, 40 points a game. Most go to college, leading their team in scoring, and most end up coming into the NBA with the ability to score. And Blake's no different than that, although he could use a little work on his free throws. Did okay last night, but he can always improve on defense, and that's just something you have to learn at that level. Now, going back to what we talked about Game 1 is, you kind of had the impression that it could have been a good butt whipping, to go down by 27 or I should say up by 27 and blow the game, and you thought they would learn and get a sense of urgency from that point going forward. Doesn't look like that right now. It really looks like this team might be dwelling on that. They might have a lack of confidence, and as you point out, they got to turn it around tomorrow. They don't have time to wait. It's do or die. One more loss and they're eliminated.
Well, that's it. That's the bottom line for them is, either start tomorrow night getting it right, or go home fast and have underachieved in a year that you had the potential to do so much more. With that said, Jacob, I am going to we'll take a quick break, and when we come back from the other side of the break, we should have Sam Amick on with us.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, we'll take a quick break.
Stepping up. And we never give up. It's all about never giving in. And we never give up. It's about who wants to come on. Stepping up. This is what it's all about. Two great teams who are stepping up, and we know that you guys are ready to go. It's about who wants to come on. That's what great players do. Big plays. Stepping up. And we never give up. It's all about having the heart of the champion.
In order to decide who really should have graced the cover of NBA 07 The Life Volume 2, I'm challenging Kobe to a one-on-one. Come see the Mongoose take on the Mamba. No way the Mamba's dropping 81 on me. I want you, Mamba! Mono y mano! Whatever number you're wearing, Kobe, I got it. I'm all over you, Brian! You know what? You can run, but you definitely can't hide!
Rivalries, that's live in the NBA. NBA 07 The Life Volume 2, rated E for everyone.
I'll walk it off.
And we're back with the NBA Unplugged with our guest, Sam Amick. You're speaking with Jacob Noble from the ProBasketballTalk.com. Alongside of me, as always, is Brian Geltzer from the HoopsCritic.com. Brian, we got Sam with us?
Sam is on. Sam Amick from Sports Illustrated and SI.com. Sam, we really appreciate you giving us some time today. How are you, my man?
Doing great, guys. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Always our pleasure. Jacob, you want to start, my man?
Oh, absolutely. So, Sam, we were kind of just breaking down this Memphis Grizzlies and Los Angeles Clippers series, which I think we'd safe to say most people are a little shocked at the outcome, even though there are a few select panelists that have selected the Clippers to win in this series. But most people like the Memphis Grizzlies heading into the playoffs. Talk to us a little bit about what your expectations were in this series and what you are seeing that is not happening in terms of the Memphis Grizzlies' performance.
Well, I mean, to me, and I'm not breaking any news here, but with the Grizz, it's just this idea that they've got a huge front line and a wildly talented front line that they're just not getting the most out of. It's funny because an L.A. reporter, you guys have probably read him, Eric Pincus of Hoops World.
We know Eric well.
He had asked Vinny Del Negro before yesterday's game a question about the Grizzlies front line, and Vinny gave him a hard time because he used the word meaty, as in M-E-A-T-Y, to describe the Grizzlies front line, and everybody had a chuckle. But I mean, it was an accurate word. These guys are big, they're brutish, and they're tough, and they're talented, but they're not getting enough out of them. And Marc Gasol, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he had his first bucket in overtime, last night. And it's part of the identity crisis of the Grizzlies with Rudy Gay back in the fold, and their strengths on the perimeter. They just go through these stretches where they don't know how they're going to get it done, and I think it's coming back to bite them right now.
Yeah, it definitely looks that way. We talked about it before he came on about just, Randolph and Gasol, between the two of them, 4 low post touches the entire game in the overtime last night, which is unbelievable when you think about what really sustained them last year in making the playoff run that they did. Let's go to the other side for a minute for the Clippers, because a little something bugs me these days when I read things on Twitter and the media and what goes on when people talk about the Clippers. Vinny Del Negro, as we know, was very close to losing his job somewhere 2/3 through the season. Now, how close is probably up for debate. I got to tell you, up 3-1 in the series right now, I know he's not a brilliant tactician, X's and O's wise. I think he's done a fantastic job thinking outside the box and finding some matchups for them that were really, really favorable. Talk to me a little bit about the job you think Del Negro's done and how well his guys are relating to him and how much confidence they have in him.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's one of the most unique coaching situations that I've seen in a while, where you've got a guy who's kind of widely considered, to call him, this is going way too far with it. There's people who think that he's a joke and he shouldn't be in the job.
Right.
And I'm not one of them, but I don't, I'm not about to compare him to, to Doc Rivers or any of those guys either. You look at him and he's got his shortcomings, but, at the same time, he's got this group, doing what they need to do. I think the parameters for him all season long, and this is out of the mouth of Neil O'Shea, their GM, was that come postseason we need to be a relevant team that makes an impact. And to me, that was always a first-round victory. He's on his way to doing that. I think his greatest strength, to be honest with you, is yielding to, players who are probably, among the most intelligent in the entire league. Guys like Chris Paul and even with Chauncey Billups being hurt, those guys are future coaches who are helping Vinny, and he's allowing them, to help him. And he's got his guys at his back. I've talked to a number of Clippers guys who were upset about the reports that he was in trouble, and it does seem like it was a rallying point. So, listen, his strengths in large part to me are less about X's and O's and more about personality and keeping that group together, and he's doing a good job right now.
And I think, Sam, you point out, great points right there, that he's more of a player's coach, and if the players trust him and he can trust the players, anything can happen, as Garnett once famously said. And we saw that in Game 1, down huge deficit in the fourth quarter, his star player comes over and says, put me in, I want to do this, I want to give this a shot. And, most coaches in a 27-point deficit would say, no, let's just take this one off. It's Game 1 on the road, let's not kill ourselves over it. But he pulled the trigger and it ended up working. I am not sold that Memphis is going to come back in this. I think they're dead in water. I haven't seen anything from them that tells me otherwise. So, not the best question I'm going to ask you, but do you think they have a chance in this series, and do you see them coming back and making this an interesting series?
As far as Memphis, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, they do have a shot. These guys, for one, I think very highly of Lionel Hollins. I think he's done a fantastic job, and this is a bump in the road when it comes to the way he's using his guys. I think, you guys made great points about what they're doing down low, and that's just not the way to do it. You would think they would follow that blueprint of last year. But they are the kind of team that, for me, they're on my short list of teams that have got a whole lot of fight in them. I think Tony Allen set the tone on that front. Early on in the season, I was really impressed with the way that Tony not only set the tone defensively, but he's a huge leader in that locker room, the kind of guy that I guarantee you he's given those guys, Rocky Balboa speeches about coming back and things. So, I would not be surprised to see them. If they're going to go down, they go down fighting.
One more question on this series, and then we'll move on to others. Blake Griffin, who, granted, like a lot of other players, limped into the end of the season, played tired at the end, but he was starting to get banged a lot harder in the last month of the season than he had throughout. Teams were getting wiser to the fact that putting him on the foul line was a smart strategy. And let's face it, no one loves the stare downs after the big dunks. It seems once he entered the playoffs, he's much more resilient and mentally tough with that stuff. He's not staring guys down after the dunks, but more importantly than that, he's getting hit really hard, jumping back to his feet, going back just as hard next time. And I feel like Griffin's maturing as a low post force right in front of our eyes by doing it on a playoff stage. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing out of Blake Griffin.
No, I agree. Just to make sure, guys, am I coming through okay?
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good.
Okay. as I walk the piers of Huntington Beach. I know you're jealous.
No, very much so. I'm in rainy Jersey right now, Sam.
It's funny, Brian. I'm right there with you. I thought that last night because I was at that Clippers-Memphis game. And listen, I wrote a big piece on Blake a few weeks back and was well aware and studied kind of, his development or lack thereof in some areas. I really thought that last night captured everything that you're talking about. I mean, it is. He's still staring guys down a little bit on the dunks, and that's just his personality. But it's not, the way that he bounced back, the way that I thought his chemistry with his teammates last night, I thought was probably the best I've ever seen. Where, I had heard some rumblings that among his teammates there was frustration because, he would get hit hard, they would come to his defense, and then he would be over in the corner, licking his wounds rather than being right there toe-to-toe with his teammates in defense of him, if that makes sense. And the guys, were kind of getting tired of playing the bodyguard role, when he wasn't even going at the guys who were putting them on the deck. And that's not what I saw last night. I saw a guy that, it was the first time that I've ever felt like, it's easier said than done. But if this guy can just be fearless, and hopefully it doesn't result in a serious injury. I know that's always a concern. For him to play fearless is a risky proposition. But psychologically, if you can do that, there's just, guys just can't check him. He played differently. He did bounce up every single time he got knocked down. He had a different chip on his shoulder. To me, it was a legitimate, genuine chip on his shoulder and not this fake tough guy thing that he spent a lot of the year doing.
Now, shifting gears here, we're going to go from west to east here and kind of jump back and forth across the country with all the playoff series. One series that has been interesting and confusing and every other word you could think about is the Atlanta Hawks and Boston Celtics series. Now, Game 2, we expected the Atlanta Hawks to come out and put a hurting on Boston, take a 2-0 series lead back into Boston with Rondo being suspended for the game, Ray Allen injured still, but didn't turn out that way. Paul Pierce put his cape on and became a superhero. Then Game 3 rolls around, and we thought the Hawks would just, basically roll over and die without Horford and Celtics coming back with Rondo, but they made it a tight game. And then Game 4, with Al Horford back, Josh Smith back, it was a blowout. So every prediction I have in this series, game by game, has been completely wrong. What are you seeing in this crazy series that is standing out to you that you probably might not have thought would happen?
Well, for me on the Boston side, it's a continuation of what we saw in the regular season, which is, I was like most other folks and had, them dead in the water, early on this year. And, the fight that they show when it does seem like, all the odds are against them is incredible. And it's fun to watch because we all know that these are the twilight hours for this Celtics team. And to their credit, they're making the most of it. They're going to try to, ride this thing out as long as they can. So, that side of it is less surprising to me. All that being said, still less surprising than, the Hawks because, they're almost more, we're talking about throwing darts at the board, try to project, what they're going to do. But listen, both deep, talented teams that are showing that, even when stars are out, they can get it done, and it's been a fun series.
It certainly has been a fun series, and I agree with you. I'm very a little turned off to kind of the Hawks with the fact that they've hit enough adversity, and it seems to be a little bit of a rollover here for them. With that said, I would think coming back home tonight is not a bad place to get well, and it certainly wouldn't surprise me to see them extend this thing to 7. Looking a little bit past this round, making the assumption that the Celtics get by this round, and having a matchup in the next round that appears to be easy on the level. Talk a little bit about the way you'd see the Celtics match up with the Sixers and maybe a Derrick Rose-less Bulls team.
Well, I'm feeling like the Sixers, will finish this thing off.
I think so too.
They have a look about them. I kind of feel like they've, if you're in that locker room, and I was Doug Collins, you try to find a way to capture the magic they had early on this season and tell your guys, listen, I know we limped to the finish line, but, for a long stretch there, we were the best thing going in the Eastern Conference. I was up for Coach of the Year, and you guys all look like the selfless, superstar-less team that did it the right way, and let's get back to doing that. And the Derrick Rose injury, as tragic as it was for Derrick, it opened that door. So I feel like that's the direction they're going. If we're looking at Sixers and Boston, I think great series where I would absolutely, though, be giving the nod, to the Celtics. It's the been there, done that factor. On the coaching front, you're talking about two phenomenal coaches. That would be fun to see the games that get played as far as that goes. But I'd be giving it to Boston. I think the Sixers are going to be a classic team that if they get out of the first round, they feel like it's a success. Obviously, especially if you're an 8 seed knocking off a 1 seed. But, I would think you might have a letdown on the back end of that.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there. Philadelphia is not a strong interior scoring team, and Boston's weakness is interior defense with the lack of centers and lack of bigs. However, the one thing that does scare me is Philadelphia did play Boston very, very well during the regular season, albeit it was early on in the season when they were playing red hot, as you pointed out. So that matchup scares me. Plus, they have the wing defenders to keep Paul Pierce in check, and they could do some things defensively. They might stick Andre Iguodala and Rondo kind of the same way the Heat do with LeBron from time to time to slow down that machine. Talk to me a little about Rajon Rondo, because it appears that Jackie McMullen's piece pissed him off because he went out the next day and then, put up a triple-double. On the following day, 16 assists and 1 turnover. It could be more so for he feels like he let his teammates down, and we hear the stories that he waited outside at the bus after the Game 2 victory and shook everyone's hand and thanked them tremendously for saving his butt, to say the least. Talk to us a little bit about Rajon Rondo, and we know Woj kind of did a whole piece highlighting that he is the one person who can stop the Miami Heat from winning a championship.
Yeah, he's incredible. This is the guy that, and I'm going way back there, but, if you go back to the draft, nobody thought this guy would have this kind of a career. They didn't think he'd get his shot in order. They didn't think, the penetration ability. They knew it was good, but, to be the way he is incredible. He's a special player, and it's for me, it's crazy because this season began with stories like, one I wrote, which was, Boston's trying to get rid of Rondo, and they want to do a Chris Paul thing, and then obviously, to a certain extent, he was on the block. There's a short list of guys they would swap for him, but you talk about a roller coaster year for a guy that I think league-wide now is getting the respect. He's the heart of that Celtics team. Kevin Garnett calls him that routinely. If all the ducks have got to fall in the right order for the Celtics to beat the Heat. I still just do not see that happening. But I think, I agree with Woj as far as, Rajon being special enough to even make that a conversation, but we'll see. He made a mistake in bumping, the official a couple games ago, but he's a heck of a player.
We touch on this for a second, the Chicago-Philly series, and I want to go back there real quick because, I agree with you that I think Philly's going to end up finishing this off. And you look at the Bulls in this series, and yes, Derrick Rose got hurt. It pulls your heart and soul out. It's your superstar player, and it's your chances to win a championship. But the things that have crumbled for the Bulls here, Sam, are not things that Derrick Rose necessarily brings to the table. The rebounding's gotten weaker. Their team defense has gotten weaker. Talk a little bit about what you've seen out of the Bulls here and why the whole structure of what they're built on has crumbled. They didn't crumble this way in the regular season. Granted, the competition's tougher here, but they didn't crumble this way in the regular season when Rose was out. Yet in the playoffs, it looks like they kind of did. Everything they stand for has gone down the tubes. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, my read on it would be, and I don't think I'm alone here, it's fascinating to me from the standpoint of, I don't know how to phrase it other than the humanity of the pro athlete. And I think if I can play armchair psychologist for a minute, if you're the Bulls, and you obviously, I think they were 18-9 without Derrick during the regular season. They're, a deep, well-coached team. But it's one thing to lose a guy like Derrick Rose and have that hope that that on the back end, when it comes playoff time, he's going to be there for you. And you're doing this thing as a group, and that's where your head is at. It just, from the outside, and I haven't covered any of that series in person, but it certainly seems like him going down completely took the wind out of the Bulls' sails, and it really did cut at the foundation of what they had going. It was everything you're talking about, the defense, the rebounding, the guys who got it done without him but aren't getting it done now. I just think that maybe if it was the Eastern Conference Finals and Derrick goes down, they've got enough left to hold, the ship together and keep it going. But in the first round, if you're on that team, that you're talking about a 2-month journey almost where you're trying to get to the ultimate goal without him. And as best I can read on it, I just, they don't have that in them, and I think we're seeing that.
I think that's a fantastic point. I never even thought about it that way, that, they expected him to come back, so they were sort of overachieving, but as Brian points out, that wasn't the best schedule, or I should say it was the best schedule for a team missing their star, because they played a lot of easy opponents during that stretch. It didn't really have too many contests that were, notches on their belt for good wins. I'm with both of you guys. I just think the Bulls have the 76ers have kind of taken the bull by the horns here. They see the light at the end of the tunnel in this series, and I think that, the way they've been playing, they've been, aggressive, they're faster, they're quicker, they're stronger. They just seem to want it more than the Bulls, and Chicago seemed to just kind of die out. But I'm with Brian here. I'm more concerned about the way the coaching staff has not gotten their players up to play, and the motivation tactics aren't there. They seem to have quit as a collective unit. You said you didn't cover that series, so I won't ask you that question, but what do you see for the future for the Bulls going into next season? Do you think that they need to make some roster changes, or do you think they should just kind of roll out the same roster as they did last year and this year and hope that injuries don't plague them again?
Yeah, it's not a sexy answer, but I think they just roll out the same group. I think Derek's obviously the guy that you continue building around. I think somebody did write that, you should trade him while his value is high. To me, that's nuts. There's no way you do that. So, they've already shown they've got a group that gets it done. It's just, this is pro sports. They end up having to cross their fingers and hope they stay healthy. And, it's just not in the cards for them right now. It's funny because to extend on what we talked about before and comparing those two teams, the Sixers are like the negative blueprint, of the Bulls. It's a team that would be happy getting one series victory and then going into the offseason versus a team in the Bulls, and they want it all. It's championship or bust. So that does fall on the coaching staff. I don't know what else they could have done or what the vibe is in the locker room. Tom Thibodeau obviously was a guy that ends up finishing second in the Coach of the Year voting, and with good reason. But it's just not happening right now.
Let's switch gears for a minute. Talk about the Lakers and Denver a little bit. Going into this series, Sam, I thought that you'd see Denver put up a real good fight against the Lakers. And I was a little disappointed, certainly, in Game 4 more than anything else. Game 1 and 2 kind of went to form. I saw something at the end of Game 2 from the Nuggets in terms of getting their up-tempo game going, Lawson pushing the ball, Lawson being very tough in the pick and roll on the half court, trying it multiple times, and Karl playing a big on the floor at all times, a 7-footer, whether it's McGee or Mozgov. Game 4, he went for a 1-minute stretch in the fourth quarter without either of those two guys on the floor. They got hurt for that. Their up-tempo game wasn't there. The Lakers won the tempo war, and it ended up being Andre Miller post-ups and Gallinari ISOs down the stretch for them when, Lawson is really their best weapon. Talk a little bit about George Karl, if you think he's gone wrong with strategy at all or if it's too much of an uphill fight, and do you think they can, win one on the road here and crawl their way back in?
Well, I don't see it as far as them crawling back in. I think with George, he's mixing and matching quite a bit, obviously, but I would agree with you, Brian, that, it's you don't have to be a Hall of Fame-bound coach like George Karl to realize that you need to fight length with length in this matchup. And the Nuggets, I think the general audience still doesn't realize how long the Nuggets are. They're one of the few teams that actually matches up okay. But up front, and like you said, if you go away from it, you get hurt real quickly. That being said, I kind of feel like it's less about what the Nuggets are doing, more about the Lakers. And you point, straight to Andrew Bynum and his infamous admission that, he wasn't ready going into Game 3. He goes scoreless in the first half. If the Lakers do what they should do, then, they close out, tonight. And, they move on. And it's just not a – actually, it's a decent matchup for the Nuggets, but they're just, they're a much lesser version of what the Lakers have going. The tempo thing, they haven't exploited that enough with Ty Lawson. He is, he's their guy. Gallinari obviously gets the extension, and he's a big part of what they're doing, but Ty Lawson is the tone setter, and they just haven't had enough of that. So, listen, with George, yeah, I do think he's gone wrong as far as matching things up, but it's also been an interesting year for them. You're talking about a few months into him even tinkering with this roster. They made serious changes all throughout the season, and And to me, we say the Sixers would be happy getting a first-round victory. Sorry about the background noise there. I think the Nuggets would be thrilled to just get another W. If they get one more, they feel pretty good about themselves.
I think you just pointed it out there, Sam, with the inconsistency of the lineups. They're constantly changing, and to me, when I looked at this Nuggets team after they made that trade, it kind of said that, we knew where we were with this current roster, and we're looking for the future. And by George Karl experimenting with different lineups, different rosters, getting players back from injuries, getting players back from China, kind of just incorporating all this change and just constantly changing, to me it's kind of like they're just collecting inventory on what they have and what they need to do going forward. So I agree with your assessment there that they can get a couple of wins. That's going to be, very beneficial. But it seems like, if they had Nene here, I'd take this series a little more serious in terms of the Nuggets' expectations to win it. I didn't think they'd win it. I thought they'd fight, and every game's been fairly close with the Lakers pulling away near the end and unable to match Bynum and Gasol down in the low block. So that's been interesting. Talk to me a little bit about what you think George Karl's future is with the Nuggets. Do you see him being here long term? Because I know he has a long history of coming up short in the postseason.
No, I think he's fine. I think it's going to be up to George and how long he wants to be there. In fact, I've talked to Masai Ujiri, their GM, about George recently, and it was, a casual conversation, but it's positive, so I guarantee him Masai wouldn't mind me sharing it. I mean, he's in love with his coach. That's it. And, feels like, he's done a great job this year. Feels like he's a guy that's going to, a guy like JaVale McGee, that George is going to, get the most out of him. One of the luxuries, I guess you would say, that come with a guy like George Karl as part of the Nuggets strategy is the fact that, a guy like JaVale, who people would probably call him infamous for a number of reasons. People wondered about his head. Is he the kind of guy you can count on mentally, things like that. Masai looks at that and says, I can add guys to this team that other teams might be afraid of and have a ton of confidence in my coach, is going to get the most out of him. So, as it relates to his future, I think he's fine. They're excited about what they have going on. JaVale is a restricted free agent this summer, so they basically, this is a tryout. They're trying to see how much do we believe in this kid, and I think they're happy with him. So again, it's obviously for them, it's less about chasing the Larry O'Brien trophy and more about building a foundation here.
Let's go to the Lakers for a sec, who have two more to play without the artist formerly known as Ron Artest. And then they're going to get Ronnie back and have to kind of integrate him in. Now we know in an Oklahoma City series, Ronnie's role is going to be crucial because he's the primary Durant defender. But they've managed to fill in for him quite well here in this series, especially with a backcourt that I never thought could cut it together defensively, but seems to in Steve Blake and Ramon Sessions on the court together. When Artest comes back, do you see that Brown continuing to use that combination down the stretch run of games, or is Ron going to just come right in and reassume that role that he had?
I think he'll reassume the role. I think his value defensively trumps, the lay of the land offensively against the Thunder. The Oklahoma City is obviously, one of the most high-powered offensive teams in the league, play at a fast pace, and you're right. Ron is certainly not a Durant stopper, but he does give him problems. And percentage-wise, Kevin has had a hard time with him in the past. And in the playoffs, that's the key when you're playing Oklahoma City. You can just, minimize the damage from Durant. Even if he ends up getting 30, if he gets 30 on, 38% shooting, then, you're probably happy with that. So I think, Ron will reassume the role. And I don't think, you talk about defensively, if you got, that backcourt combination trying to size up with, Russell Westbrook and his speed out there, then, you're going to have problems. So we'll see. I think it's funny you mentioned the suspension, the fact that they still got a couple of games left. And I know this is mostly ludicrous, and this probably would never happen, but it's kind of the, a brand new version of tanking. It crossed my mind the other day. Is there any chance that the Lakers would be content, losing another game in the first round, knowing what's at stake and the fact that matchup is huge against the next opponent? odds are you just don't mess around in the playoffs. And I know that's, probably there's no way they think that way, but you could argue that it would help them if they go ahead and drop at least one more game.
Well, Sam, I'll tell you, I almost asked it. Because it can't not cross your mind because of how important. This is a series they can survive without Artest. And there's other teams that they don't necessarily need him. You're going to play Oklahoma City. You're absolutely right. He's the one guy that can get Durant. Listen, Durant may get 28, but if it's on 28 shots, Ronnie gets his job. And that's what they need him desperately to do that. And there's not one other guy on their roster that has the capability to do that with Kevin Durant. It's the most important role Ron can play for them in any series ever. So you'd think that you just would probably want him for the whole series if you knew for sure you could get by this round.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, Matt Barnes is the guy that they would be sticking on Kevin. And if I kind of visualize and project that matchup, Matt is a physical guy. He's not afraid of any matchup. But I would envision, the way that probably goes is Matt gets feisty. Matt is slapping at Kevin's arms, and Kevin exploits that. The refs do not, my impressions, the refs do not like the way Matt Barnes defends. I think he gets in foul trouble quickly. Kevin has his way because from a physicality standpoint, he's not even close to Ron, and you don't have that impact of, putting Kevin not on his heels, but at least making him think about every direction he goes. Matt can't do that. I mean, Kevin can size him up. Decide, am I going to shoot over the top of this guy? Am I going to go left? Am I going to go right? He can do his thing. And I really think that, if they don't have him for a number of games, Durant can just get off to a phenomenal start.
Yeah, Ron Artest is one of the best at positioning his body and making players go to where they don't want to go. So I agree with both of you on that end. Matt Barnes is the feisty defender, and he's annoying, but he's not Ron Artest. Let's shift gears. We have a couple more series that are still underway, although, most people have the series as being over. The first one I want to talk about is the Indiana Pacers and the Orlando Magic. Now, to me and Brian, by winning one game, the Magic have exceeded all expectations they were going to have this offseason, or I should say this postseason, going into the offseason. But they played fairly well from time to time, except for a couple of fourth-quarter collapses. But the Indiana Pacers are starting to get buzzing. Everyone's picking them to, potentially give, the Heat a little bit of run in the second round. Talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing the Indiana Pacers do to the Orlando Magic, and do you think it carries over when they play the Heat in the second round?
Yeah, it could. They, I don't know how long it's been since we had this many teams in the playoffs that they had that formula of, minimal star power and maximum depth. And the Pacers are obviously another one of those teams, just like the Sixers and the Derrick Rose and Bulls, rather. I think that, Indiana, whose coaching staff on the love list, I think Frank Vogel is a great young coach, and I think the world of Brian Shaw. They're pulling all the right strings again, and I think I would harken back to last year's first-round matchup against Chicago when, they were so feisty and so dangerous, and kind of it was their little coming out party. They could do the same thing against the Heat. Defensively they're strong on the perimeter and they're deep, and down low they've got plenty going on too that I think they could have the way with Miami's front line. If Roy Hibbert's doing his thing, and David West I think is one of those guys that especially once you get into the next round, it's the veteran who knows that Father Time is ticking, and how many shots is he going to get? He's going to want to play special basketball. So, yeah, they could, I wouldn't be picking them over Miami, but it could be a fun matchup.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think their size is going to give Miami some issues, and I wouldn't be picking them over Miami either. Before we leave this series, let me just go to the Orlando side for a minute. I know there's not a ton to talk about the way Orlando's played. Without Dwight, it's very difficult. But with Orlando, it really this year has not been at all about what's gone on the court. It's been the soap opera and the subplot. And we'll just get to it real quick with you because, I've heard some things, and there's certainly been reports in. Before the reports, I had heard some rumblings that Dwight wants out. Dwight's going to want out, on or around July 1st to get me out of here, trade me, while there's still some value for him. And then you have the whole issue of Stan Van Gundy going into the last year of a contract and what they're going to want to do there. My inclination is that they're both going to be done in Orlando at the end of the season. Between who you talk to, what you think, give me an idea about what you think about Dwight and Stan's futures beyond this year in Orlando.
No, I think, Brian, you're probably dead on. I mean, I have a hard time seeing Stan continuing, even if Dwight is gone. And for that matter, I think Otis Smith is probably in trouble, the GM.
Oh, yeah.
I think, Alex Martin is the new CEO. He's kind of the new man in charge. And, he's working with Rich DeVos, the owner, who, they got they're in concert and the other guys are not. With Dwight, I also agree with you that that's probably what happens in July. The rumblings I was getting was he does feel like Stan threw him under the bus when he publicly came out and said that he had asked for Stan to be fired. They, the claim from the Howard camp is that it's not accurate, that, it was the Magic going to Dwight, and it was, they were the ones talking about parting ways with Stan. So, well, it's like if it was a marriage that just started when Dwight Howard decided to stick around for another season, then it would be a married couple that's looking for an annulment, But the new CBA doesn't have annulment, so it's like, man, it went south real quickly. Right after they decided to stay together for another year, and we'll see. Maybe I'll wander over to Dwight's hotel here in L.A. and pick his brain and get some answers for you.
Sounds good to me, Sam.
I know Brian's been very interested in what's going on in Orlando. We almost need to set up a camp down there just to report to Brian every day because he asks everybody about the mess that's happening down there. And honestly, I like to stay away from it because to me it's not basketball related. It's all political. It's front office. It's management. It has nothing to do with the product on the court because not much is going to change on that team going next year. So it's a fun circus to follow, and it probably intrigues most people, but to me it bores me. But let's talk about a team that probably has never and will never have a circus in their front office, and that's the San Antonio Spurs. They took care of business in 4 games against the Jazz. They get to rest up a little bit and wait to see who can come out of the Memphis and Clippers series. Talk to me a little bit about what you expect them in the second round against both teams, how they match up, and what your expectations are for them for the rest of this postseason.
I mean, my expectations are, I had them in the finals against Miami, and I had them losing, and I'm starting to question that pick. I really could see them winning a championship. If they, health, as always, with every team, but more so with them, health is huge. They've got, legitimately 3 different guys that if you lose one of them, and Manu and Timmy and Tony, that, you lose one of them, then go ahead and take them out of the championship running. But if you don't, they're going to be there. And they're a different version than years past. They're high-octane offense and above-average defense, but nothing like years past. And they, I think they would love to have revenge against Memphis, for losing in the first round last year when Memphis obviously was the 8th seed. So I think given their confidence level and the fact that they probably feel good about beating either Memphis or the Clippers, they'd probably rather see Memphis just to have fun with them and kind of make amends or get the revenge. But if it's the Clippers, I think the Clippers are in serious trouble. I think, Memphis probably has a better shot at them just given their makeup. The Clippers are doing good things right now, but a lot of it is just stuff that's not going to work against Griffin. I watched they actually gave the Spurs a good run in the regular season to one of the games in L.A., but, Blake versus Tim, I just don't see, Blake hanging in that matchup. And then the physicality that throws the Grizzlies off is not going to have the same effect on the Spurs. So they're right there. They Miami is the sexier team from a star power standpoint, but this could be another one of those lockout championships for the Spurs.
All right, I'm going to take you to in our myopic East Coast world, what we see as the center of the universe, which is the Heat and the Knicks. In talking about that series, you had Heat obviously are going to come out of this. I would think they're going to win Game 5 and put this away. And the Knicks were able to give just a monumental effort on Sunday to be able to get one. But a few things occurred there for the Heat during that game that will make you scratch your head a little bit. Number one is the fact that LeBron fell back into some old bad habits with perimeter jump shots as opposed to attacking the rim. And then the second thing was the last play of the game. And I'm always at one Sam, to say that this whole who gets the last shot thing's a lot of nonsense. However, there was a report, and I'm not sure how accurate the report is, but there was a report that Spoelstra was drawing a play up and Dwayne Wade essentially changed it on his own to a pick and roll for him and Bosch. These types of things, how accurate are they? How much do you think it can be a negative influence with the Heat in terms of working against what they're trying to do as a team? And are these the types of things LeBron may take personally going forward?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I do. I think it's a tricky dynamic. And you look at something like that, and if you're LeBron, who, right now anyway, I think has the public and a lot of the media, myself included, on his side when it comes to being impressed with what he's done and getting it done at the right time. It's kind of like if you want him to grow and develop and shore up the weaknesses he had before, you can't be undercutting that by having a guy like Dwayne Wade, who's an established closer and a special player, kind of deciding that I don't like the new way of our world. I'm gonna go back and do it the way we used to do it. That's absolutely the kind of stuff that can, shortchange a championship run without question. I think, I thought LeBron's responses after the game were interesting. He just kind of casually talked about how, well, of course I would like to have the last shot, but it's a team game, and it was so down the middle and political with his response that it kind of lent credence to what you're talking about. Maybe it is a problem. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know Dwayne Wade well enough to know, how he sees things right now, because as damaging as last year's playoff run was for LeBron's reputation, all it did is continue to cement Dwayne Wade as, it was a lot of good cop, bad cop. I mean, it made him look good, when LeBron looked like the guy who just couldn't assume that role. And, only Dwayne knows if he's okay taking a back seat, this time around, but they better figure it out, because if they don't, that's how you get yourself bounced.
Jacob, you got another one? Because I got another one on the Knicks real quick with Sam.
Yeah, I kind of, no offense to any Knicks fans or Heat fans, but that series just is too much hype and not enough liveliness for me to care. The product of the court has been boring, it's been blowouts. The only real game was the last one where Melo went off, and for a team to have a guy go 40 points to have a chance to win is not one that I want to spend too much time on. But go ahead, you want to ask some more Knicks questions?
Well, yeah, one more on this one before we address OKC Dallas real quick. You had a report today, Frank Isola of the Daily News, who is, when it comes to inside stuff on the Knicks, is really the number one guy in this area. Frank reported today that Mike Woodson is in contract negotiations on an extension, and that the Knicks have chosen to forego even making a pursuit of Phil Jackson or John Calipari. To your knowledge, number one, how accurate is this? Number two, forgetting about Calipari, which we all know would be an unmitigated disaster, let's talk a little bit about how wise is this to not even make a run at Phil Jackson. And I'm not killing Woody. He's done a very good job with the Knicks here. But are the Knicks, I mean, do they know something we don't?
I'm getting mixed signals on that. I agree with you about Frank and his insight on the team. He's nailed. And I did look into that today. And what I can tell you, and honestly, I'll write some of this in a couple of days. I've got my, no offense to Knicks fans, but I'm already working on my Knicks obituary.
Okay, fair enough.
The sense I got is that, that trying to figure out the most accurate way of putting this, that Mike has indicated to people that those talks took place. And some of the dynamics coming into play, are interesting, and we'll see where it goes. I'm not entirely, on my end of things, ready to say 100% anyway that it's a case of, things like Phil Jackson being completely off the table already. That could be the case. I don't know that to be the case. So I'm not sure exactly where that goes, but I do, have reason to think that, that Mike has been telling people that, that they have approached him about a future together, and, exactly what the pulse is on those talks is kind of what I'm unclear on right now.
And honestly, if I'm Phil Jackson, I don't want that job. It's a losing battle. Your expectations are through the roof. It's championship or bust, and I just don't think Knicks fans are being realistic. The style of play has changed constantly. It's something I brought up about Nick's talk throughout the season is every time they go get a new player, they change their philosophy. At least when they had, D'Antoni before any melodrama, they had a style of play. You got a guy, Amari, who fits into a system. They were exciting for that time period. And then once they went after Melo, to me, they just changed their whole dynamic on what they wanted to do. So that's my 2 cents on the Knicks. You got any more Knicks questions, Brian?
No, I'm done with the
I was
Knicks.
going to say, just to add on to that, guys, I hear you, Jacob. I haven't looked into Phil individually and his interest level, but I don't know. I feel like if you're Phil, it might be enticing enough because, what he does best is get guys to buy in, on a personality/psychological standpoint. I think he could probably do that, and even, kind of a rudimentary look at what they're doing. There's solutions right there in front of them that they're just not using, and it's part of what I'm going to get into in my story. I talked to Steve Kerr about them, and it's, just concept that, if you have Amari come off the bench, if you do this, you do that, you got to get guys to buy in ways that require the egos to be put on the side and things like that. But, nobody has more success doing that than Phil Jackson. And then, beyond that, if he's able to find some guys who flock his way to play on veterans minimum deals that fit, what he's doing, I think there's a couple of tweaks that could be made and a couple of additions that, that he could be a hero yet again as far as, taking a team to the next level.
Now, let me ask you one more on this, as long as Jacob went there. I was ready to walk completely away from it. Okay, I'm like Michael Corleone in The Godfather 3. Every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in. Is Phil healthy enough to do this job? Is he healthy enough to travel, sit on the sidelines for 82 games? Is he in at this stage of his life? I mean, you can't get inside a man's head and know does he want it, but is he physically up to the task? Because it's not easy. A lot of travel, and it's certainly not free of hassle either.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of unique insight on that other than some reports that the answer would be yes, that he, excuse me, that his hips, are good enough that he could get it done. He's obviously had, a year off and rest, and he's been doing his thing. So I don't know exactly where the motor is. One of the tea leaves that I was reading was he did an interview with Mark Heisler from, formerly from the LA Times, and it was in the New York Times. I'm sure you guys saw it.
Yes.
And to me, it was like, Phil doesn't just grant that interview because he likes Mark as much as they do have a good relationship. And Mark is a pro. I just read that like, all right, that's Phil's little way of saying, wine me, dine me, and then maybe you can sign me. And, we'll see what happens. That stuck in my head as far as an indication that there was at least mild interest.
Interesting. All right, Jacob, take us away from this, please.
All right, I know we want to touch up on the Oklahoma City-Dallas series, which started off as a fight with the first couple games, and then turned very badly for the Dallas Mavericks. Me, it was just a fact that Dallas didn't want to. I mean, you can't say they didn't want to, but they just didn't have the pieces, and they just seemed to look at that series a little realistically, kind of coming down, to the wire in the first two games. Didn't get to steal one from Oklahoma, and from there kind of had their heart torn out. Talk to us a little bit about what you saw in that series and what you expect for the future of the Dallas Mavericks without saying the word Deron Williams. You can say Deron Williams if you want.
I agree with your assessment. They look like a champion where, from Dirk on down who still had the heart of a champion, and the pride kicked in for the first two games, and they tried to overcome the fact that the roster was not the same as it was the last time they played, in the playoffs. And, no Tyson Chandler, no J.J. Barea, Deshaun Stevenson. And this is not the most flattering, comparison, but my colleague Chris Mannix just wrote a blog about Evander Holyfield saying that he wanted a title fight, as he's nearing 50 years old. The Mavericks aren't quite that bad of a version of that, but that kind of was what it was. Like maybe Evander lands a punch and maybe he gets the title belt. And that was what I saw from the Mavs, this fact that they still had a puncher's chance. But, I think, once they couldn't sneak one of those first 2 games, then it was all over. The future looks potentially pretty grim. I think, Mark Cuban, I understand why he took the chances that he took to preserve cap space and make a serious run. Part of, why he's been so successful in his life is, he doesn't have this defeatist mindset that, guys aren't going to come to Dallas as free agents. He's got a winner's mindset that I'm always going to be in the game, and maybe he ends up surprising me and landing one of those free agents that are not to be named. But right now, I don't see it. I have, heard that from one of Darren's people that he's leaning towards the Nets, and just kind of hopes that, kind of looking at them like, come on, just do a deal that, something that puts us a little bit more back on the map. Gerald Wallace doesn't get it done. He's just really hoping, for things to work out there. So Dallas is in a tough spot. It's not what the fans want to hear, the Mavs fans, but they still might be better off because of what he did. Because if he would have locked up Tyson Chandler for 5 years and done long-term deals on a Barea, things like that, then, he'd be taking hits if they lost in the playoffs and looked like an above-average team that was going to be completely cash-strapped for the next 5 years. That wouldn't be ideal either. So it's kind of a tough in-between existence they're in right now.
Let me take it over to OKC for a minute. I was very critical of Scott Brooks last year in the playoffs, especially in that Dallas series, because I just felt like he had a couple opportunities, especially with playing a small lineup, where he really could have made it hard for Dallas in a transition game. And his excuse at the end was, well, I like to play big. Well, liking to play big hurt him a lot in that series. I was really impressed with the job that he did in these 4 games. From the early switch of taking Harden off of Terry and putting Westbrook on a Terry, I felt was an enormous wrinkle for them in keeping Terry in check, which is a big thing in beating Dallas. I thought that playing more small lineup, he went with a lot of small lineups against Dallas, helped out a lot, forced Dallas to go small at certain points in time. And then the other thing I thought was terrific was the fourth quarter of Saturday night, where he ran the same pick-and-roll play with Harden 16 straight times, didn't get fancy. You can't stop it. We're going to keep running it at you. Talk a little bit about Scott Brooks, if you agree with me or not, if you think he's growing into the job a little bit, and you think he's a guy that can take it to the next level and be a championship contending head coach.
It's funny, Brian. I didn't realize, it was 16 straight times with that pick and roll. That's incredible. And to me, that speaks right to Scott and who he is. I've gotten to know him when I was a Kings beat writer. He was the Kings assistant coach under Eric Musselman. And, to me, what's going on with him is true to form with who I, have found him to be, which is a guy that is going to improve in large part, and make great strides no matter what he does as a player, as a coach, because of, this attitude that, all right, I might not get it right this time, but I am paying attention, and I'm going to grow, and I'm going to develop, and next time I'm going to do it differently. And that's some of the stuff that you're talking about. And even the pick and roll anecdote speaks to the fact that, he doesn't need to put on airs, and mix and match for the sake of mixing and matching, so that people can see enough activity on the sideline that they can say Scott Brooks is a smart coach. That's just not how he thinks. I talked to him this year about, himself as a coach and his development, his growth, and he just flat out says, I'm a better coach this year than I was last year. And I love that idea that, the ego is not there and he's just trying to get better. I think he has done a great job. And I think he knows that as much as he's in a great spot right now, he's got to improve to, avoid becoming that guy, who gets cast to the side when his bosses decide that this group is special enough that he's not, coveted anymore. I mean, he doesn't have a contract for next year, and so he's in a extended job interview right now, which sounds funny considering how long he's been there. But if I guarantee you, if he fell on his face in these playoffs and had serious strategic mistakes, it could end up costing him his job. So I do agree with what you're saying, and it's kind of fun to watch.
It's a blast. It's a blast.
My last question to the series to you is, how serious is the Kendrick Perkins injury? What have you heard of it? What's the extent of it? How long is it going to be out? And let's play the devil's advocate here. Let's say Kendrick Perkins does not return for the Oklahoma City Thunder this postseason, which most indications are he's going to go out there and fight. But if he does not, how far do you think Oklahoma City can go without him?
I don't, unfortunately, this is one topic I'm not coming to the table with much. I don't know anything on the injury other than what I've read. I have not talked to their guys. And with Kendrick, I'm more just an interested observer. You know, you never want to see a guy stay on the shelf, so I hope he gets healthy. But if he doesn't, you know, we'll have a chance to kind of step back and assess whether or not we've, you know, overvalued, you know, Kendrick as a player and his role with that team. I think there's guys around the league that roll their eyes at this whole idea that Kendrick Perkins is the championship caliber, you know, core player that is a missing piece in the Thunder. I mean, you know, I remember when the Celtics first started beating people because of their big three, you know, I remember guys around the league just really, it was kind of like Blake Griffin light in terms of guys getting irritated with Kendrick and this whole notion that, you know, hey, you know, you're not as good as us. Just kind of the arrogance that came with Kendrick. He's got plenty of guys who think he's terrible and he's lucky to be where he's at. So I'm not necessarily falling on that side. I think he is, you know, a huge part of what they do defensively, and he is big in the locker room. But, you know, it'll be interesting to see if he doesn't come back, how they look.
Sam, you gave us almost an hour today. We cannot thank you enough for giving us so much time, and it was a blast. And, you know, one of the things we talked about before you came on is just you're one of the best info guys in the country, but when we get you on here, it's analysis. And it's a blast hearing you talk about these series and your take on everything, and we can't thank you enough, my man, for spending the amount of time you did with us today.
Brian and Jacob, I appreciate it. It was fun. You know, it was a video interview, you'd see why I wasn't sweating it as I walked the beaches here. But anytime. Enjoy the rest of the run, guys.
All right.
Sam, a lot more to talk about.
Excellent, Sam. Thanks so much. We're going to reach out to you again real soon, and we're going to get you back on. You're our man, Sammy.
All right, guys. Thank you. Be good.
All right, pal. Take care.
Take care, Sam.
Bye.
It's funny, Brian, because we didn't even have to ask him the gun to the head question because he already answered it throughout the conversation today.
He did. You know, he gave us everything.
I was thinking for a minute. I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'll give him a gun to the head question, but say he can't use those two teams.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah. just to see him try pulling teeth to figure out who would be in the finals if the Miami Heat, you know, lost LeBron and Wade, and the San Antonio Spurs, you know, got into a bus accident and everyone was in the hospital with minor injuries. You know, what would happen then? But he's fantastic. And one of the things that I took from this interview with Sam is the way he looks at the psychology of basketball, and you know, when the way teams are thinking beforehand and after him, because they have to be, and I don't think enough writers and media guys take that into consideration. And the Bulls series was the one he highlighted for us to kind of, you know, popped in my head and say, well, you know what, I never thought about that way, that the Bulls were playing their tails off in the regular season, knowing Derrick Rose was coming back, and when he went out in that postseason game, game one, that all went away. And they're showing it, and Philadelphia was on the other end. You know, they limped into the playoffs, and, oh, geez, you know, Derrick Rose is back. Evan Turner said some things in the media to stir all this. And then circumstances took a turn for the better for them. And they're taking it and they're running with it, pun intended, you know, with the style that they play.
Absolutely. Listen, I thought that was great. Two other things I thought he said. I was very, you know, I thought he was going to dismiss some of these LeBron Wade alpha dog issues in Miami. He did not. He feels like that could be an issue going forward here, and that's going to be something that's going to be very interesting to watch. In LeBron kind of by his comrade being forced to be a bystander at the most important times of the game. You know, I thought that was interesting. The other thing I thought was interesting is, you know, he's not ruling out Phil Jackson taking the Knicks job. He's also not ruling out Phil Jackson taking another job if it doesn't end up being the Knicks job. I got that from him too.
Well, the other team that kind of just popped in my head right now, Brian, is the Oklahoma City Thunder. You know, if they decide they don't want Scott Brooks, I think that's a perfect team for Phil to take. And let's not kid ourselves. Phil always chooses battles because when you have 11 championships and you've done the jobs that he has done throughout his career, you can decide where you go. I mean, he's not going to go to the Bobcats ever, regardless of how much money Michael Jordan pays him. Even if Jordan agrees to suit up for him, it's not going to happen. So Phil's obviously going to take a team where he feels he can turn into a championship caliber team. They might not be one like the Knicks, but if he thinks he can do it, you know, he might do it. And nobody knows what that guy's thinking.
True, but a couple of things we do know that he's thinking. Number one, it's going to require an 8-figure annual salary to get him out there.
Yep.
And Clay Bennett's not paying that. I will tell you this. If Brooks doesn't get brought back, there's one guy to me and one guy only for that job. That's Jeff Van Gundy's job.
I hope so, for your sake, because you know you and I are big Jeff Van Gundy fans. The guy has more reason. However, I will miss him, you know, doing broadcasts because he's the only one that, you know, he says things that the fans are thinking. And it's like,
yes.
You know, the game's not made for big guys to fall down. Wire flops. And, you know, he'll call ridiculousness when he sees it. And as it happens, and he's a fantastic coach, and I hope he gets another chance. So I'm with you there. I hope he gets another chance. Be interesting to see, but until Scott Brooks gives Oklahoma City a reason to let him go, I think he's going to stay.
I think so too. I think it depends upon the run here. They lose in a series to the Lakers, maybe not. I think he's got to take him either back to the conference finals or the NBA finals to keep his job. I think he's got a lot of pressure on him. And by the way, if we lose Jeff on TV, it probably means we'll just gain Stan, so it'll all be good.
Little cheap shot at the Van Gundy brothers. Hopefully it means more Hubie Brown because he's phenomenal to listen to.
Yes, he is. With that, Jacob, I got to roll myself right now.
Absolutely, and I'll do the sign-off for everybody.
Thank you, sir.
No problem. That's Brian Gelzeller from hoopscritic.com. You can follow him on Twitter, hoopscritic. He's a fantastic account. He does so many radio shows and podcasts, and he spends more time on the radio than he does talking to his own family. So give that guy a round of applause because he works hard out there, and he's got some goals he wants to reach. And I'm Jacob Noble from theprobasketballtalk.com. We hope to have a show on Thursday. Might be an early day show. We're going to reach out to our guests and see who's available to come join us. So that will do it for us here on NBA Unplugged. Again, we'd like to thank Sam Amick from Sports Illustrated for joining for practically a whole hour to break down these NBA playoffs. And always a great guest. Follow him on Twitter. And that will do it for us, everybody. Take care.